Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is a show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the tri-state area, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. And sometimes we go outside that region to get somebody that we think is really important for you to hear about. We're glad to have you here. I'm Carter Seaton, and today our guest is Sheila Redling, who writes under the pen name of S.G. Redling. She is the author of more than a half dozen novels, including the best-selling thrillers Flowertown and The Widow File. She's a former radio host in the morning, way early in the morning, an avid traveler. She's also a language geek, a wine enthusiast, a so-so gardener, and a harborer of stray and feral cats. She graduated from Georgetown University and currently lives here in Huntington, and her home state is West Virginia, of course. She also has a wild array of wildlife that live near her. So she's my good friend as well, the creator of a monthly event called The Fiction Factory and a sought-after workshop leader. Her latest book is Trigger, and it's the third in the Danny Britton thriller series. Glad to have you, Sheila.
Thank you, Carter. Gosh, I'm going to have you introduce me everywhere. Just, Carter, tell them what I do.
Yes, that's it. Well, I know you've been on Chapters before, but it's been a number of years. So I thought what we do is to kind of go back to the beginning and how you got into writing. And I know that there's a story that probably they have not heard, which I know well, but I want you to tell about your very first pitch to an agent.
Oh, gosh. I give a lot of workshops, and some of them include how to pitch. And I always lead with this story to make people feel comfortable. It was at the West Virginia Writers Conference. You were there, and I had just finished my first book and thought, I'm going to go. I didn't know anything about pitching. I didn't know anything. But I went to this conference, as I do, just kind of marched in, and they said they're taking pitches. I thought, how hard can it be, right? I'm just
and
going
you practiced it on me.
I practiced it, and I thought, I knew nothing about pitching. I went into the agent, and I started my pitch, and she sat there like this as I pitched it. And then she went, "That is the worst pitch I have ever heard." And I laughed, and I said, "Yeah, but it's a really good book." And then she laughed, and she said, "All right, if you can handle that, if you can look me in the eye and take that and then tell me to read the book, I want to read the book." And she's been my agent ever since.
That's just priceless.
So I always tell someone, if you're pitching, don't be nervous, because I have already given the worst pitch that could ever be given.
You
cannot go lower. I mean, short
lower.
of vomiting on her, you could not. And even then, you have a chance.
All right,
Yeah.
and that was your debut novel.
No, that was Ourselves. That was pitching Ourselves, which came out 5 books later.
Okay.
Because I then started, I had written I'd written Ourselves and its sequel, The Reaches, and it wouldn't sell. So we tried to get in on a mystery. So I started pitching a cozy series, which is, a low violence, kind of like, Murder, She Wrote in a series.
Right.
And I started putting that together. And the way you pitch one of those is you create the characters in the world, you plot 3 books, and you write the first 3 chapters. And it's a lot of work. And I submitted that, and that was... I got we love your writing, but it's not for us. Can you change this? And then can you change that? And then can you change this other thing? And then finally, can you throw it all away and give us something completely different but similar? And I did that, and then they came back and said, we think we want to go with the original version. And I absolutely lost my religion on my agent, who at this point was used to me. And she said, "Sheila, do what you do best. Kill people."
Somebody.
So I went home and I wrote Flowertown, and that was my breakout novel.
That book is really wonderful.
Thank you.
No wonder it sold so well, because it's a character that you can't help but love, even though she's foul-mouthed and just a mess. She's wonderful. But
that
the
had a hard
storyline
time.
is marvelous.
That was a hard sell, though, because they didn't want a female who was dirty and unpleasant and foul-mouthed. If she'd been an Army guy, I'd been like, of course, and he has a beautiful Army sergeant in love with him. But no, she was gritty and tough, and still, but thank heavens they took a chance on it, because then it gave me my career, basically.
Well, the time frame when you wrote that, though, there had been some sort of a spill of poisonous something in this region.
remember
A few
growing
years
up-
before that, or something that
Excuse
kind
me.
of triggered that idea in my mind when you wrote it. I thought, I've seen a situation where chemicals spilled and it caused a problem. Certainly
Well,
not to the extent that
Right,
it
at
does in
Flowertown.
Flowertown.
Well, I don't think it's any of us here along the Ohio or Canal rivers are strangers to chemical spills.
Yes, right.
But no, actually, I remember as a kid the carbon tetrachloride spills. And that was a thing, when you were 6 and you had to boil your water before you could make your hot cocoa. And it was such a normal thing. But when I was trying to come up with the idea, what I wanted was to make a group of people disappear in the middle of the United States. Like, how do you just make citizens disappear? And I didn't want it super sci-fi, like Escape from New York, and I didn't want it in a big city because no one ever forgets what's going on in New York or California or Chicago. So I thought the way you make people disappear is have a tragedy in a flyover state, in one of the, unimportant states to the news. I originally thought about doing it in West Virginia, but then I realized that even if you put a fence up, West Virginians would not stay contained. They just wouldn't. Geographically it's tough, and culturally they'd just be like, no, I'm leaving. So I picked Iowa, which is a very lovely, calm sort of state. The geography was perfect, the flat land, easy to fence in, people who were kind of, I don't want to say more responsible, but
Good, solid citizens.
exactly. Thank you for putting that delicately. Yeah, so that's how that.
Yeah.
That's how
All right,
that
what book came next then?
Then, when they picked up Flowertown, I knew that from that point nothing was going to be the same. It was either going to hit and they'd want more books like that, or they would laugh me out of the publishing world and I'd never be picked up again. So there was a book I really, really wanted to write. And I knew that this was my last time to write without anybody looking at me doing it. And that was Damocles. The very strange, sort of groovy sci-fi book about language and friendship, which was a terrible follow-up to Flowertown. But I did it anyway. And so I wrote that next, and they took it, and it did really well. I mean, people loved it, but it was kind of a conflict for the audience. It was a little tough to brand me after that.
Yeah.
But I love that book. I still stand by it.
Yeah, I liked it too, and you're right, it was very different, but the idea of two different worlds trying to communicate, the whole aspect of language was fascinating.
And the first contact, but we're the aliens.
Yes,
And then how do you make us look alien without I didn't want it to be like they had antennas and things. It was very similar cultures, and so we only know what they look like by how they described us. It was just a really fun challenge. I
and
love
really
that
in the
book.
beginning, you do not realize that we are the aliens.
Right.
That was fascinating, yeah, so that was really
Thank you.
good.
I'm really
So,
proud of that book.
Your protagonists tend to be women. What drew you to creating such either strong or quirky or determined women? Was it you?
Well,
in disguise?
Here's the thing. Other people have put this better than I will put it now, but that's that crazy idea that women are also fully fledged human beings. I know it's shocking, and you wouldn't know it to watch television or movies, but women actually do things that are gross and weird, and we don't all jump out of bed in cashmere pantsuits, and constantly think about our breasts. It's like we have other things on our mind. So I just put women in the books that I think are complicated enough and have the right baggage to make the story work. I like, I know a lot of complicated women. And it's really nice, and it's very freeing to not have to keep the same old female tropes going, that it's not about my baby, where's my baby? I get to make them weird and gross and rude and shy and squirrely and all the things that women actually are in real life.
Yeah. All right, so Danny Britton,
I love her.
she begins in the book The Widow File. And she appears to be a fairly ordinary girl who's just working in an office, and all of a sudden the world goes to hell in a handbasket, literally.
Yes.
And how did you come up with that idea? And did you have places to take her after that before you finished Widowfire? Did you know that this was going to be a series, and where it was going?
Well, I knew it was going to be a series because it was part of a 3-book deal. I didn't have a lot of time, so
Okay.
that helped. And I didn't have a lot of time to write the Widow File. I had a very short turnaround time for it, I think 12 weeks. So I knew I had to write a short, fast chase book. And I absolutely love 70s espionage films, like 3 Days of the Condor and the Parallax View. That's my jam completely. So I made the beginning of the Widow File a very clear homage to the opening of 3 Days of the Condor, the film, with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. But then setting her up, in a lot of ways I needed someone who was not Ellie, because Ellie from Flowertown, because Flowertown had gotten so much attention, and I didn't want to be the person who writes the same character over and over
Yes.
again. So she had to be Ellie's opposite in a lot of ways, where Ellie was loud and vulgar and filthy and very much in your face. Danny is like a cipher. She's just squirrely and keeps to herself, and she's very private. And getting her foil with Tom Booker, who I also love, the villain who pursues her, they really showed me they showed me each other. And as that book unfolded so quickly, I realized that she had so much to do. Like, she had legs all over the place. So after the Widow File ended, which, spoiler, again, she lives, because there's a second and a third book, I needed to get her. I'm always trying to not do the same thing, I guess, in every book. So I needed to get her out of the cold dark of the DC night and that heavy cloak of espionage. So I took her to Florida, where it's blisteringly hot, and there's nothing federal about it. No one's in a suit. No one is the people that have been chasing her all this time. And she gave me another great story.
Yeah, I could just see that place where she worked. Yeah.
You know, what was funny with that was I had started the book, and I had just imagined this place. And then I was like, well, I need to, for research, I had to go to Florida,
Certainly,
right? I just got to tell the truth.
absolutely.
So we found this place on the old wooden bridge, is the No Name Key, and I walked onto this fishing camp, and I'm telling you, it was like I had built it from my imagination.
Isn't that
It was-
wonderful?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, really great.
Do you, speaking of the travel, do you travel often to try to find your settings, or was that an anomaly?
That kind of was an anomaly. I had the time at the time. I had left radio, so I wasn't working at all. The writing was all I did full time. And now, and I've traveled a lot. I lived in New York, I've lived in DC, I've lived in California, and I've gone to Europe, several places. And so I have a sort of a back stock of locales should I need it. And then I also obsessively send for visitors guides from all the states in the country. I've got like stacks of them all over my house, which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like with the third book, Trigger, it's set in Connecticut. Most of it is set in Connecticut, and I've been to Connecticut enough to make it do what I needed to do.
Right, right. Okay, so tell me about her friend Choo Choo.
Oh, I love Choo Choo. I say that about all my characters. I'm sorry, but I do.
It's good. It's good. You should
Yeah.
love your characters.
And Choo Choo.
Why else? Why write them if you don't
Exactly.
love them?
I had to fight for Choo Choo. When I first wrote Widow File, my editor and my acquisitions editor did not like him. They wanted him cut. They thought he was silly. They didn't like his nickname. I got a lot of flack in my reviews for giving him that nickname. But, I went to Georgetown University, and there were a lot of boys from that echelon of society, and they all had names like, Ding Ding and Skip Skip and all kinds of stupid nicknames like that.
Like the
was-
girl's named Muffy.
Exactly,
That sort of-
and just the weird.
The male counterpart of that.
Exactly, and the boys had them too, and I had a very, very distinct idea. Choo Choo was probably the realest to me, quickest of all the characters, and he got to unfold really nicely because he seemed sort of silly in the first book, and then in Redemption Key you learn that he really is not silly at all, and then in Trigger, and again there was that nice juxtaposition where he's the one that uses his looks and his sexuality to get people to give him what he wants, as opposed to Danny having to do it.
And Tom Booker seems to have become less scary in a way in Redemption
Yeah.
Key. You begin to go, well, maybe he's not such a villain. but then,
But he's a villain, right? That's what's interesting about him, because he is, I mean, he's a killer. But considering the people that Danny has been up against who've been trying to kill her, in a lot of ways, he's the least dangerous. He's the only one that never lies to her, ever. He keeps a very clear moral compass. He doesn't play games. I mean, if he says it, it's the truth. And, you know, in an upside-down world, he's sometimes the only person she can really trust. And she really confounds him. I like that dynamic of how they just confuse each other. And then with Trigger, I got to give him a lot more backstory with the
Right.
Paper Sisters and how he does the work that he does. And that was really fun. The Paper
okay,
Sisters were a lot of
let's
fun.
talk a little bit about
Okay.
Trigger. So you've brought her, she's left Redemption Key, and she's back in the DC.
No,
sort
she's
of-
still in Redemption Key.
Okay, but she has to come home or come back that way because of a family reunion for Choo Choo.
Right, Choo Choo, like they're on Redemption Key. They're trying to recover from what has happened in the previous book. And Choo Choo's family comes down and says, we need you to come home. Your uncle's died. We're having this Christmas photo taken. It's a big family thing, and we need you home. And you have to come home because your sister, who is a senator, has gotten threats on her life, and we're afraid that they'll use you to get to her. And so Danny does not want to go to Connecticut because that is not her world in any way. And she's very much afraid that she's going to lose Choo Choo, who's really her only friend. So, but she goes because that's what you do when your friends need you. And things don't go as planned, let's put it that way.
Right, so here you have a whole new villain.
This villain, too.
Okay.
I mean, you know the
You-
story of this
yes.
villain.
Well, you've got to tell us about how you chose, first of all, the villain, and secondly, how you decided to name her for one of your very good friends.
It actually started in reverse. When Trigger was put off, I was going to write Trigger right after Redemption Key, but my publisher wanted me to write 2 standalones, so it got pushed back and pushed back. And when I had originally started Trigger, Kara Hedrick, who's a very, very good friend of mine, said, I just want to die in one of your books. Just let me die badly, screaming. Because Tom Booker always kills someone in the beginning of a book. She goes, I just want to die. It's a weird request, but it was her birthday. I was like, I'll give it to you. So I started it, but then she was so funny because I was putting a lot of her quirks in. I'm like, I'm sorry, Kara, not only are you not dead in the first chapter, I think you're the villain. And then, then she was all over it because Kara is very funny and she has got some very particular mannerisms, which you'll know in the book because she does not, and this is true, she does not eat any food that has a remainder. Like she won't eat a chicken wing if it has the bone. She won't eat a strawberry if it has the cap. And I have given her grief about this. When we get together, I tease her for it all the time. So, of course,
You
that's
have
who
to
she
put
is
that
in the book.
there. Absolutely, right.
And I wanted to make sure, because she is a good friend, that she was the worst villain. And she is the worst
Yeah,
villain
she's
I've ever
pretty
made.
diabolical.
Yeah, because you can trust her. Like, she earns Danny's trust. And there is no lower circle of hell than betrayal. And that is what she does. She's the worst villain, which she loved. So when I had the first book signing for Trigger, I had the table set up and I had it, S.G. Redling, author. And then I had another table for her that said Kara Hedrick, villain. And she signed the books too. It was just fantastic. It was so much fun.
That's wonderful.
She's thrilled. She loves
Yeah,
being the villain.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's great.
You're
So,
next, Carter.
Am
What
I?
happened?
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. I'm not real sure I want to die, so you can just
Okay.
do with me as you wish.
Sure.
Okay?
Okay, well, then you probably won't fit in my books because people tend to die very badly
Well,
in my
I
books.
could be talked into it.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. All right. So you do write, and we talked about this just a brief bit earlier. The women. How do you differentiate them? Do you ever realize that you've got a character here, and all of a sudden they've got the very same characteristic
Yeah.
as character in, say, Damocles?
It's tough, because for all the variety people have, there's only so many ways characters in peril can act. I don't have any acrobats, and I'm not going to make someone a surgeon because I don't want to do that much research. I try to, excuse me, I try to give them enough life before I start the story that once the story starts impacting them, they show me new aspects. Now, I will sometimes go a little off because, like with At Risk, I made her like almost the opposite of every character I've ever written. She was where all my other characters are kind of rough and loud, and when push comes to shove, they get violent. Colleen was very buttoned down and nervous and tense until she wasn't. Because still, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I get them. I make them real, and then I let the story
So
unfold.
that makes me come to the idea of your writing process. I know that you are a habitual notebook carrier.
Yes.
And in these notebooks, you clearly spill your brains and then use that to go back to the actual writing.
Right.
Have you done that ever since the beginning?
Yes. I'm getting a little bit better at, it's not outlining, but organizing my thoughts better so I have, because you always know how a story starts and you generally know how it ends, and there's that messy part in the middle. I'm getting better about knowing my steps in the middle. But mostly what I do in my notebooks is say, if this happens, why would this happen? What do they gain? What do they lose? How are they lying to themselves about it? Those are the three best questions to ask. And then if this happens, what? And what if it's this and that? And I try to run long scenarios and find my way that way through a story.
Yeah.
But I do
Sort
a lot of just
process
thinking
of
it.
asking a question or putting somebody in a situation, and then their response to it triggers the next.
Right, because
question
people
or the
have
next
to act
situation.
logically inside the system. And people are vastly illogical creatures, but they have to be logical inside their own book. The difference between fiction and reality is fiction has to make sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Do you ever see yourself doing a male protagonist?
Ourselves has one male protagonist, half, I doubt it. There's enough male protagonists in the world. I don't need mine.
You're right. How did you? What inspired you to write these kinds of books as opposed to, I don't know, romance?
gosh.
I mean, you said that you always loved the thrillers, the
I love horror. I love sci-fi. I like stories that are weird. I like stories that make you question reality. I like stories that make you think, "Oh, what if that happened?" I like changing one thing in the world and then watching it all rebuild itself that way. Like, what if you couldn't trust anybody you lived with? What if you lived on a world where nobody slept? What if vampirism was not a curse, but just a genetic anomaly? And I like just asking a question like that and then letting it unfold and rebuild it. So I don't know. I don't have it. I just like
you
telling
just
weird
do
stories.
what you do. So do you have a favorite author that you read when you were younger that kind of informed your?
I have to say, I know it sounds a little corny under the circumstances, but I was really sad to see Mary Higgins Clark pass away. I got to interview her when I was on the radio, and
did
she
you?
was as famous as she was, and there weren't many people more famous than Mary Higgins Clark. She was as down to earth and lovely and enthusiastic and still really excited about writing as anyone with their first book coming out. And I thought that's the kind of person, that's the kind of writer I want to be. I always want to love it.
Well, it sounds like you do every single one of your characters. And I love that one. And
I love
that
them.
one.
I can't
love
help
that one.
it.
Yeah, right. Okay, you do lead a lot of workshops for writers.
I do.
What's the most asked question, if you will, from aspiring writers? Is there one?
The quest I see so many beginning writers want to do is they want to write their own life story in a book. And I can't tell them to stop fast enough because they're taking all the magic out of fiction by trying, it's like, well, this is what really happened. Well, that's not good fiction.
It's just like you said a minute ago, fiction has to be
make
logical. It has to make sense, even if it really didn't. in life.
Right. And,
Yeah.
if I want to read 300 pages of nothing happening, I'll read my diary. This fiction has to have a conclusion and a point. So I think the biggest problem people have is giving themselves some distance to let their characters, they don't trust their characters. You have to build them, let them introduce themselves to you, and then let them show you who they are. Make it as hard as possible for them so they can show you who they are.
So throw obstacles in their way and see what they do.
And trust them. Trust them. Let them do things. Give them things to do.
Well, I think what you said a minute ago about loving your characters, if you know your character well enough, then you will trust them and you will be able to know what they would do.
Yeah. And no, I'm not a
Or-
big dossier
No.
builder for my characters, but you have to learn to listen to people and try to take people apart as characters. I don't know.
Are you doing that to me?
Hold on, I need my notebook. Where is it? It's a strange alchemy, and I think the biggest problem is people don't trust themselves to just finish a book, even if it's a bad book. I always say you learn more from dragging one terrible manuscript over the finish line than you do
Yeah.
from abandoning 1,000 starts. Just finish something, and then you learn how you write a book.
Do you have new projects on the horizon?
Yes.
Yes?
In Trigger, remember Choo Choo's cousin Olivia Wren that they stay
Yes.
with in New York City?
Yes.
She is getting her own series. The first one is done, the second one is underway. This sort of a misadventure series of her and her best friend Margot, who just get in just everywhere they go, just chaos ensues. Sometimes it's murder mystery, sometimes it's theft, sometimes it's kidnapping. And the first one is Wren in Rome, and they go to Rome, and Margot's fiance is kidnapped by nuns, and that's how the book starts.
Wow.
Yeah, so another perfectly sane and realistic novel from S.G.
Do you
Redling.
need to go back to Rome to research this?
Look, I don't make the rules, Carter. Want to go?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That sounds like a great one. Yeah. And so that's not a Danny Britton. It's going to be a new series.
Yes, completely
Will there
separate.
be another Danny Britton at some
Oh,
point?
yes.
Oh, yes.
Now that the Paper Sisters are on their feet and they're away from the whole espionage issue, because I really needed Trigger to put a period on the end of that plot line.
Right.
The federal government is pretty much leaving them alone in the sense that they had done it before. So now it's going to be much more about Tom and all the danger that is opening up in her world now because of her association with Booker and the Paper Sisters. And don't forget the Canadians are still in play.
Right, right. Yeah, from Redemption Key.
Yes, so there's...
Yeah. You have had a steady publisher throughout most of your career?
Yes, Thomas and Mercer and 47 North, who are two branches of Amazon Traditional Publishing. I put the Reaches and Trigger out by myself. I thought I'd just give it a try. I'm terrible at marketing, but they've had a good response, both. So, it's a messy world. You've got to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
So now I've got a book. I just turned a book into my agent that she's shopping right now. A big, weird, surprising, big, weird book, a thriller about a cursed city in West Virginia.
Wow. Does your brain ever stop, is the question. I don't know how with your wildlife, your cats, your,
Well,
all those
yeah, I
things
mean-
you managed to get it all done.
Oh, and now I'm
Just-
tap dancing too, which is my new thing.
You
Because
must be much more prolific than a lot of people. I mean, clearly you've got, and how many years have you been writing?
the first book came out in 2012. Well, it's better than not writing. Then it's what I love to do, and I was away from it for a while, so it's really nice to be back to it.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's fun. What do you read? Do you give yourself a chance to read?
I do, and I'm fortunate enough to get to read a lot of my friends are writers, and I get to read some of their work in beta before it comes out. I'm reading Todd Robinson's newest one. I love his work. He's got a Boo and Junior series of the crime in Boston, but this is a new. He's kind of going in a new direction, so that's really nice. I'm trying to read more nonfiction. I like to ask people. I like to pick people's brains, so I'm lucky enough to work next to the chair of the political science department when I work at the visitor center, and so I asked him for some recommendations. He's given me some great nonfiction books to read about politics. I tend to like crime, mayhem, mind-bending sci-fi. Blake Crouch. I've read a lot of Blake Crouch lately, and I wish I had more time to read. My eyes get tired. I wish I could just upload them to my brain.
Yeah. Do you ever try Audible?
I do, but you know what? 15 years in radio, I listen differently. I'm still waiting for the post, waiting for the commercial to start. I can't. I've tried so hard. I'm working on it, though. I'm working on it.
Right, right. I've asked a lot of people this, but I'm going to ask you the same question. If you had a dinner party,
Okay.
who would you invite to the dinner party? Living or dead?
Living or dead?
Yeah. I guess you get to invite Mary Higgins Clark now.
Mary Higgins Clark would be nice. I would invite Dorothy Parker
Oh, fun.
because and Mel Brooks. Those would be my two comedy for sures because I think they're two of the funniest people that have ever lived. Who would I invite? Can they be fictional?
Oh, if you want to, yeah.
Sure, it's my dinner party, right? What are you going
That's
to do?
right.
Kick me out? Ellery Queen, maybe? Ellery Queen and Nancy Drew. They'd be another pair. Gosh, I don't know. Angela Lansbury, I've always wanted to, I don't know, I love Angela Lansbury. I've loved her career, every movie she's ever done.
I actually met her once at a glove counter in New York City.
I can honestly, that would be the only person I would probably get starstruck around.
Yeah. She was buying a pair of gloves.
Was she lovely?
Yes.
Of course she was, because
Of
she's
course.
Angela Lansbury.
Right, exactly.
I know it's a
Right.
strange detour to take, but yeah, she is. Every time I give a lecture about how I got into writing, she's somehow always keeps popping up in my stories. But yeah,
Have you ever abandoned a book and put it away like an orphan, and do you just think you'll ever resurrect it?
yeah, the book I just turned in,
That
I
was
had
an orphan?
started. It was an orphan, and I had started it not long after my mother had died, and I was trying to keep my writing alive, and I really wasn't in the place to do it. I was tired, but I loved the story. I knew the story had legs, and it was a really meaty story, and I wasn't in the place to write it. And I started it, and I pitched it, and everyone knew it wasn't catching yet. It wasn't what it needed to be, and I was heartbroken because I loved the story. So I put it away, and I thought, every time I looked at it, I had this little stab in my heart. And I wrote Trigger, and I wrote The Reaches, and I wrote the third non-book. I wrote other books, but that book has just been sitting there for the longest time. And I thought, I'm ready to do this. And I took
Good.
it out, pulled it apart, needed a lot of work. And I could see, it's funny, have you ever gone back to old stuff? Mm-hmm. You see where you were laboring, where you were grinding your gears. Mm-hmm. And it was a little cringy reading that, having to extract that bad stuff. But everyone, you do it. You do what you have to do. And now I love the book.
That's good.
It's a crazy, another insane book. And so that's done. That's turned out. I'm waiting for that to find a home. And there's another one that I've started that it's a big weird sci-fi book that I'm like, let's give it a whirl. About alien children, because that's, of course, that's a good follow-up to an
right.
espionage novel, right? Sure.
Right.
Makes sense.
All right, folks, we're not quite through talking with Sheila Redling, but so we'll be back another day, and we hope you'll tune in then to see the rest of this interview. Thank you so much.
Connect with Chapters via email. Write to lp4@zoom.email. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, and follow. All chapter episodes are available on YouTube. Visit Armstrong's YouTube channel. Follow Armstrong. And look for a playlist of all the chapter's programs.